Ich darf alle Freunde begrüßen zu unserer ersten Podcast-Folge des FIUME-Magazins. Heute beginnend mit einem ganz besonderen Gast, Curtis Yarvin. No need to introduce him, and nice to have you, Curtis.
It's a great pleasure to be here. This is my first time in Zagreb, and it's a beautiful city and a beautiful place. And I was talking to someone the other day, or the other night actually, because I got in last night, and I was just I said something very politically incorrect, like it's a beautiful, really an Austrian city in a way. Like you can see Austria all over here.
Absolutely.
And I said something like, the only problem here, or the only thing that needs to be done, is that before you deport the gypsies, you should put them in manacles and have them clean up all their graffiti.
You drink to that, and Zagreb, Croatia, is not very far from FIUME. Certainly the name of our magazine. We talked about, you didn't visit FIUME, but certainly you are aware of...
How far, of course, how far is FIUME from here?
Actually, because we were yesterday there and we did some photographies and...
Can I go to FIUME and get the FIUME tour guide? Is there like a...
Well, I was hoping that, and I was hoping we went there with a team, and I was hoping like seeing everywhere like D'Annunzio, Devozionalia, and things about the Republic of FIUME. But I think, and this is understandable, that the Croatians are not very...
They're not very fond. They don't want to remember
This is not fun for them. Also, even calling FIUME, it is actually in the...
To dead name it is like, it's like saying, I'll often, just because I like dead naming and I like annoying people, I'll just suddenly, subtly say the Ukraine, and
Fantastic.
people respond to that. But
talking,
does anyone still speak Italian in FIUME, or was it all ethnically cleansed?
Well, we didn't notice that, but I think the city has still his Italian roots and still reflects this history, even if it is not like a direct influence, or that you have not the signs of this Republic of FIUME. I mean, the European history is very fragmented and sometimes difficult to deal with
you have
changes.
The smell of it. You have the you can.
Which is more important, I think. Like really to just being affected by the aura.
The Geist.
The Geist. Yes.
The Geist. Has not left.
And talking about the Geist, FIUME as a state. I mean, it was a kind of para-state, a state which lasted like 2, 3, 4 years.
Well, and it's a state, it's like, we have this word state, and we're like, oh, the South Sudan has become a state, right? And of course, it's just complete African mess. And the idea that to call something a state is an objective rather than a normative description is like, in a way, here, let me ask you for something provocative that you've probably never thought about. Compare FIUME to ISIS.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, yeah.
Can we?
Interesting and deep. And I would say, I mean, without
because you
admitting
see
the sympathies for ISIS, but there are some similarities.
There are some similarities.
There is this idea of exterritoriality, like what is in our time, like the main question arises, what is in our time the absolute opposition to the liberal democratic state? What is it? What in a normative way, but also in the way state as a word.
To be an unlicensed state, to be an illicit state. And the thing is, say what you want about ISIS, as a famous tweet goes, and it was, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are very, very different. People don't understand how different those things were, because Al-Qaeda is sort of the last gasp of the 20th century Marxist terrorist, tradition that goes for Yasser Arafat. Osama bin Laden is just another Yasser Arafat. And if you read Osama's speeches, they're full of Western progressive boilerplate. You know what Osama was very concerned about? Climate change. Climate change, and the underprivileged, right? And coincidentally, when Osama's henchmen were imprisoned, cruelly and unfairly in Guantanamo, all the best lawyers in New York would fly down to Guantanamo to defend, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or whatever. ISIS, there's none of this. ISIS is a new thing. It's a strange recreation by internet-obsessed, Islamic kids in the mid, 10 years ago in Europe. It doesn't have any connections to Harvard. It doesn't have any connections to American intellectuals. It's a really post-American thing, and no interest by any of these lawyers in defending ISIS. So there's a real, ISIS is, it's not exactly indigenous because it's very FIUME-like. It's it's a new creation. It's like a new thing inspired by the old. And like D'Annunzio, amazing propaganda. I don't know if you've ever watched any ISIS videos, just, the one of the guy walking on the former Sykes-Picot line with a big ISIS banner. It was, it was magic, I'm not saying I support ISIS. They're horrible. They have sex slaves,
Absolutely. I have to admit, we always have to be careful in admiring that.
I'm very opposed to ISIS.
Just regarding the aesthetics and the idea, how much aesthetics, and we also a question or
they had amazing media production. It's like Osama bin Laden makes a video, and it's like an 8mm, video camera, and he's sitting with the AK-47 next to him. ISIS makes a video of this some impossibly brutal torture execution. They've got multiple cameras, they've got multiple angles, they've got cuts. They've got graphics. Their production, because they basically recruited all of these disaffected Muslim teenager nerd geniuses from the Muslim diaspora in Europe.
And there is this horrific, but also in an aesthetic way, really grandiose pictures of ISIS fighters with their prisoners, with their victims, and in the background the ruins of Palmyra, and really this big black flag with that Arabic.
It was so inspiring, and yet the thing is that what they didn't realize was that because most of America's 9/11 is a civil war. There are many Americans who have difficulty restraining their desire to clap for 9/11 because, this for the same reason that they supported Ho Chi Minh, they supported Osama, not directly in a way, but this sense of he's a very American figure. Osama grew up as, of course, a rich kid in Saudi Arabia. And as a rich kid in Saudi Arabia in the early 80s, I can tell you one thing he had a VCR. He had VHS tapes. And you couldn't just go on the internet and watch whatever movie you wanted. It was a question of what VHS tapes you had. Let me tell you what movie I'm pretty sure he probably watched 50 times. Star Wars. And in fact, you could do an Osama cut of Star Wars in which Luke himself, no torpedo, flies into the Death Star.
But you cannot imagine an ISIS fight, and you cannot imagine D'Annunzio doing that, because this is really this totally the other, talking with saying it with Rimbaud, this the total difference actually. And is it that point because
let's talk in a way. You mentioned Rimbaud. Let's talk about the comparison of D'Annunzio and Rimbaud, because in a way they're very similar figures, are they not?
Yeah, I think so. Especially in the affection of aesthetics to politics, and politics in a broader sense.
Because Rimbaud, having written this amazing poetry at the age of 23, is just I'm going to make my life into a poem, and it will be a poem that no one will ever read. And he goes to Ethiopia and he becomes an arms dealer. It's like something out of Bronze Age Pervert. It's brilliant, and...
No, absolutely, and very important to us, very important for our, we talked about the Kreis, we talked about the figure of Stefan George, which is kind of symbolic beginning of...
Do you feel that Bronze Age Pervert is the closest thing to Georg in the modern world? Do you know Bronze Age? Have you met him? Have you
Of course, yeah. Actually, I have to say we were very close, or we are very close in doing, because there is not a German version of Bronze Age mindset, and I admire that, and I would say
there's no German translation of Bronze Age mindset.
There's no translation. Yes, and we were thinking about doing that in our publishing house in Castrum, and
have you reached out to him? Have you?
We're trying, actually. We are here. If you have I can help. I will write him later.
I can write a letter and I'll send it to him.
Fantastic, yeah. And I would say definitely Stefan George, and especially within the idea of how we have to, or how we can define the relation between politics and aesthetics. And I would say we can, and we were talking, or I was listening to your lectures in Oxford about the end of history. Yeah. And there is this one way of arguing and saying the liberal state, or the elements of liberal constitution are declining, and giving good arguments for that. And there is another approach doing that with from a poetic point of view, like what lacks in the democratic state, in the liberal state, is actually a form of aesthetic. It's the approach to how aesthetics infect politics.
Do you know Robinson Jeffers?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I love him. I love him. It was actually lately that I a friend of ours
discovered, showed you Robinson Jeffers,
and I discovered him. Fantastic! Wow,
fantastic! You know, and you know what's funny is that, you know, they say a prophet is without honor in his own country. But, you know, one of the things that will sometimes happen, you know, Robinson Jeffers is very big. You know, you go to Carmel, California, you know, which is the town where, you know, famously Clint Eastwood was the mayor of Carmel. It's a very chic, bougie town. And it's where Jeffers, of course, lived and, you know, built his tower with his own hands, right? And, you know, the cult of Robinson Jeffers is huge, right? You know, but they think of him as kind of a nature poet, you know. And yes, he's a nature poet. He's a nature poet. Also, his career ends basically in 1948 when he publishes a book for which basically Random House's publisher has to censor 12 of the poems from this book because he's writing, you know, isolationist poems about Hitler in 1948. And who wants to read this? Like, what are you doing, right? You know, and it's lasted in this sort of amazing way where you'll read this poem. Hey, do you know his poem Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, I read
it blows my mind. It's just like you know, now you never know with these writings, did he edit them later, right? You know, but the thing is, you know, supposing that to have actually been written in 1941, it just like nothing more really needs to be said about World War II.
Yeah, absolutely. And this reminds me there is this very famous quote. I mean, there are variations of this idea. Shostakovich said it also in variations, and that actually art and aesthetics kind of need something else than the liberal state. You need kind of pressure. You need kind of repression actually to really be productive.
You need to be in gear. And you know, one of the analogies I frequently make when I'm in Europe, you know, when I describe the state of Europe today, what I often say is that Europe today is like Greece under the Roman Empire. And if you go to Athens in 200 AD, what do you see? What you see is Athens in 200 AD is very conscious. You know, when you're a city in the Roman Empire, especially the early Roman Empire, you know, you're basically like, you're completely self-governing. Like, you know, you just don't have a foreign policy and you don't have a military. And other than that, you keep to yourself and you live within the Pax Romana, and it's all good. And the result is that Athens becomes a theme park. It becomes Athens land. And if you go to Paris today, you actually can't go to Paris. There's no Paris, but you can go to Paris land. You know? And like Paris without sovereignty, without the energy of like the the military. I mean, this is a very D'Annunzio idea. Without the energy of contending for its own sovereignty. What is striking about that is that, think about all the, I mean, it was hard, and how do you write in the world of the Peloponnesian War? How do you, Athens is fighting all of these wars, and somehow Socrates creates this great philosophy. Aeschylus is a warrior, Socrates is a warrior. How do they even have time to write? Well, in 200 AD, everybody has all the time to write. Nobody needs to be a warrior. Nobody's drinking the hemlock. And, the result is this kind of incredible flowering of, oh wait, it's not. It's actually I don't think anybody knows anything that was written in Athens in 200 AD.
It was happening at all, yes.
Yeah, it was happening, but you still as a Roman sent your children to Athens to learn rhetoric, or whatever. But it was dead, and that interesting contradiction is that when you lose, the quest of Fiume did not want to be Fiume land. It wanted to be Fiume. It wanted to be, it's a real state, and it wanted to be a real state so much that it decided it was a state without asking, I think that the proper way for D'Annunzio to proceed would have really been to send a grant application to the League of Nations. But he did not send a grant application to the League of Nations, right? And that paradox in where the loss of sovereignty and the loss of military sovereignty especially creates this you lose everything when you lose that. And that is so to process. I mean, I've never been in a fight, I've never killed anyone, I've never hurt anyone, but to realize that the loss of that military energy is actually the loss of a spirit, which is essential. That's a disturbing realization for an American.
So, but I would say, this is the thing, the Europeans, maybe they are starting, and I want to come from the later past to the last 2 or 3 decades, and to the question, what happened actually in the last 2 or 3 decades. This idea of military, the idea of militarization of social structures of states. Actually, the European state, would you admit that European states can learn something about that from the Americans?
Learn something about what from the Americans
exactly? About the importance of strong military to us.
Well, the thing is, America decided in 1945 that it and its friends, the Soviets, would have the only strong militaries, and actually, there were, the world has been militarily a unipolar order since 1815. The last really existential conflict in which both sides are equal is England against Napoleon. And, when I look at World War I and World War II, people are these are not contests of equals. The Central Powers in World War I are on paper very much weaker, as are, the Germans, Italians, and Japanese in World War II. And explaining to Americans who have this comic book view of the 20th century, they know nothing about World War I, but they're kind of like Nazis, the Kaiser, sort of proto-Hitler. Okay, you can process that. So you can fit everything into this Marvel movie, comic book world. And, when I tell them, and we could talk about World War II for many hours, but my summary of World War II, which is at a higher level, my first level summary is America invaded Europe. But my second level summary is that what you're looking at when you're looking at World War II is 3 very poorly coordinated rebellions against what we now call the international community. And these are rebellions against the world order that already is basically asking to take away their sovereignty. And so England, even by World War I, puts Germany in a position where it has to fight or submit. And that is the true subtext of World War I, and still more so of World War II. And
And you would say still inflecting and still influential for our times?
What do you mean still influential? I mean, it's history, you can't go back in the past and change it. This is what happened.
Yeah.
And to know the truth, I mean, history is so important. To know the true story of how we got here. I'll say something to Europeans, for example, I'll say, provocative things like the EU is about as European as the Warsaw Pact was Polish. Absolutely, we could talk for an hour about how true that is and why it's true.
You mentioned the year 1850 and
1815.
1815.
Waterloo.
Yeah. And I will go a little further. 1848. You were in Vienna like a few weeks ago, and we're especially talking about this period, about this time, and also about the question or your subjective view on the Metternich system, and on that what came after that, or on the opposite of that, this idea of liberal nationalism, which
we see in Ukraine today. Oh my God!
And in Europe, I would say.
And in Europe, in Scotland, in Catalonia.
Absolutely, claiming and saying to be right or to be new right, but actually being something really very profound, a kind of degenerated liberal point of view.
Yeah.
And you said you would definitely favor the Metternich system before.
Well, sure, but Metternich himself, he's very aware that he's fighting a losing battle. He's very aware that he's preserving a thing. He's very aware that he's an underdog in a way. And, he flees Austria, of course, in 1848, and then the Russians come in and set things right. But, the reactionary Europe after 1848 has already suffered this huge wound. Even though Germany and Austria are put back together, and you see an illiberal Germany and Austria that last, the second half of the 19th century, the sense of that being a doomed enterprise in a way is, I think, palpable in everyone, because there's no illusion. It's like coming, as an intelligent child, you process this information, you process the history of the world, and then there are certain ways in which this history does not make sense. And you'll encounter these things like Truman in The Truman Show. You're like, and one of the things that I recall is first bothering me, I have a very weird relationship to the Austro-Hungarian world, which comes from the fact that my father, of course, is also an intellectual. He was a philosophy professor before he joined the Foreign Service. And one of his favorite books was actually the great Czech novel, The Good Soldier Schweik, by Hašek. And Hašek, of course, is communist, right? But he's a remarkable figure. This is a remarkable book. It's sort of this picture of the late Austro-Hungarian system from a very liberal, and radical perspective. It's very interesting. But when I thought about World War I was like, it's the war to make the world safe for democracy. But you would think that the goal of the Germans would be symmetric with the goal of the Allies. And so the Germans the Allies are trying to bring democracy to Berlin. So surely the Kaiser must be trying to set a Hohenzollern prince on the throne in London. Needless to say, this idea never even occurred to them, even at the most radical, like General Bernhardi. None of them were like, oh, yeah, we need to install a Prussian prince on the throne in London. They weren't thinking this way. And maybe that they weren't, the reason they lost the war is that they weren't thinking this way. Because their objectives were smaller. Always the right in the last 2 centuries has been trying to survive, and the left has been trying to win. So if we move the picture to another thing that happens very close and very affected by the revolutions of 1848, the American Civil War. Most Americans, especially conservative Americans, if you explain to them that if you understand the Civil War correctly, it is absolutely a struggle of left versus right. And of course, the South is the right and the North is the left. It's funny because one of the things, in the the kitsch American right, which is just pure kitsch, they love Lincoln, and it saddens me to have to inform you that Lincoln is the most leftist leader in the world at his time, and Karl Marx is a huge Lincoln fan, and is in fact sending columns to the New York Tribune, which is the Lincoln paper. Of course, the right in the Civil War is the South. And here is something that actually happens at the start of the Civil War, which may seem like a small issue, irrelevant to Europeans, but actually I think that Europeans should understand this lesson very well, because it's very similar to the thing that I just said about the First World War. So the first major battle of the Civil War is the Battle of Bull Run. What happens in the Civil War is that the South secedes. It considers itself sovereign. It's a kind of FIUME, if you will, and they decide that they are going to be a state and a sovereign state. And the North is like, oh no, you're not respecting us. And interestingly enough, if you are talking about the Civil War, most Americans do not realize. Most Americans, if you ask them what the Civil War is about, they would say the Civil War is about slavery. And the Civil War is essentially a crusade by the North to wipe out slavery, which is an abominable institution in the South. Well, if you were in 1861 and that was your theory of the Civil War, and you went into a bar in Richmond and you uttered that theory of the Civil War, they'd clap you on the back and buy you another drink. If you said that in Chicago, they'd kick your ass, and that is the opposite. Our theory as Americans of what was the Civil War is actually the Confederate theory of the war, and we do not understand this. But even more, the first battle of the Civil War is the Battle of Bull Run, or Manassas, the South call it. And in the Battle of Bull Run, what happens is the South is like, all right, hey, we decided to secede. We're just doing 1776 all over again. They do not realize that they are right-wing rebels. They think they are just LARPing, the American Revolution, and they're just like, yeah, well, you know what? We seceded from Britain then. We're seceding from you now. Hey, when we signed the Constitution, we said, we're sovereign states. We can reverse this if we want. And now you're just like, the North is like, the North agreed to that deal now, and now they're like doing the Darth Vader thing. And they're like, the deal has changed. All right, well, the deal has changed. Well, we have established a state, and we are going to defend ourselves. And you don't think we're a state. We think we're a state, and this has to be settled by arms. And you in the North, all right, we understand that you have all the industry and, twice as many people and all of that, but you fail to reckon with the fact that we in the South are real men. And we ride and shoot. We're aristocrats, we're nobles, we're cavaliers, and one of us can lick any three of you. And the North invades, and they send an army across the Potomac into Virginia, and the army has an overwhelming numerical superiority over the Confederate army. And it turns out that the Confederates are absolutely right. And they kick the ass of the Northern Army and send them fleeing across the river in total disarray. And the Confederates are like, I'm sorry that all these people had to die. That's really screwed up. Because actually we told you what was going to happen, and then it happened. And wow, why didn't you listen? Okay, at this time, there are no organized Union forces between the Confederate Army and Washington, D.C. In fact, there are no organized Union forces between the Confederate Army and Boston or Toronto or the North Pole. All they have to do to win the war at this time is to start walking. But the problem is, they actually don't want to win the war. They have no interest in winning the war, because the goal of the South is to be left alone. They have no idea. They're like, and it is a lie. There's something called the slave power conspiracy. The North is convinced that the South wants to rule the whole world, the whole country, and establish slavery in Boston. And the South is just like, man, you crazy Puritan motherfuckers. I don't even want anything to do with you. The idea of this is a ridiculous lie. And so when somebody accuses you of something and it's a lie and you deny it, that's often a very good trap. Because actually the South is like, of course we're not trying to conquer all of America. Of course we're not trying to establish slavery in Boston. That's absolutely ridiculous. We're just trying to be independent. And see, you tried to take away our independence with this invasion, and we defeated you. They are not fighting to win. The North knows very well how it wants to govern the South. So there's an asymmetry in which one side is fighting to not lose, and the other side is fighting to win. And the result is that the South has to win every time, and the North only has to win once.
But the question, which arose also before, like the First World War, like history influencing, it's kind of platitude, like how much is history, how much this has to do with us, with our times. On the one hand, it's like kind of historical point of view, or the historical analysis of things happened. And actually this is very much a Hegelian point of view, like the idea that history is actually influencing like what we see today. Would you say this
constantly,
is it
true?
Constantly.
So I was at a I've gotten to know some mainstream people. I've had some interesting conversations, and I was having a conversation with someone who is very much a member of the German military intelligence diplomatic world, very establishment figure. You might say he was the German John Brennan or something like that. And I have this one historical source that I show people. If you Google the words American Malvern, you will find it. And what I do is I show people this primary source, and I ask them to guess the date. And the source basically appears to be a description of the United Nations vision of the world before the Cold War of like 1945. It's like, oh, we're going to establish this world order, and they're going to have freedom of immigration and a worldwide monetary system and a world government. And people are like, they read this and they're like, yeah, this is from 1945. And then I show them the date, and it's actually from the winter of 1942. It is actually, like, these are not, people think about all these institutions that were established in 1945 as, all right, we, barely fought off Hitler's attempt to conquer the world was in chaos, and we had to design a system for the future, and we came up with this order, the international order, right? And then you're just like, no, actually, this is for Americans. This is 3 months after the war started. This is not. This is not the solution for a world in chaos. This is actually the purpose of the war.
But this is actually the point I wanted to make, because I mean, talking about history and bringing it up to a point, one might say that, I mean, fuck it. It's just history. The influence of historical events in our time is like kind of ephemeral relation, I don't want it. I don't want to bring that back to psychology. That everything is psychology.
Of course.
But the idea of discourse, the idea that we just have, and this is actually the main thing and the main argument against liberal state or liberal thinking, that discourse and the talking at the end is kind of bullshit, that you cannot do this analysis and reflecting from history to the present, because the present is always aesthetics. It's kind of really embodiment, like really doing things in a moment and doing art in the moment. Like we were talking, of course, there's this law, I don't remember, like two people being together after 30 minutes talking about Hitler, and we were talking about Hitler, and what makes it dangerous, great, can describe it how you want, is actually the fact that it is kind of embodiment. It isn't discourse anymore.
Yeah.
it's marching, it's aesthetics, back to D'Annunzio, it's the idea that liberal state, that democratic state actually isn't capable of doing art, isn't capable of understanding human nature.
No, and you see it, you see it all around you in the ugly inhuman buildings. You see it
absolutely,
and what I would say is that, like, when I go to a European cathedral, I was just in St. Gallen at this, Soros type event, which was super interesting. And that's the European elite of its day. And, I walk into, unfortunately, they destroyed the medieval Abbey of St. Gall, but they created, this Baroque church. It's pure high Baroque. It's an amazing structure. I have like 15 minutes in there before I have to catch the train. It's pure aesthetics, and it's like walking, if you're a peasant, farming, herding the cows in the hills of Switzerland, and it's 1770, and you walk into this building, my God, it must be like an acid trip. The intensity of the aesthetics are incredible. And that aesthetic is associated with power, because actually you're seeing this beautiful thing, but behind this beautiful thing is not just the church, but the state. And the church in the old Europe, the church and the state are together, they're one. Until the Reformation. In fact, this was a Catholic establishment, and it wound up in Protestant Switzerland, so it was not going to fare very well. But that, experiencing the pre-Reformation unity of church and state, you're seeing this incredible aesthetic experience. It's coming along with a religion, and it's coming along with, the absolute power of the state. And and so you have no choice but to engage in this aesthetic experience. And what that's turned into now is basically, I think there's a Mike Ma term, which is a harassment architecture, and you're basically like, when you build a brutalist building, for example, that people admire it not because it's beautiful, but because it's powerful. And power and beauty basically have diverged, and so people look at the sort of, almost sadistic in a way. I lived in San Francisco for...
I just want to say, this is actually a Kantian idea. Like, there's this German word, das Erhabene, which das Erhabene means kind of, don't know how to translate it into English. It means like reflecting to aesthetics, but meaning like this grandeur of aesthetic things,
Yeah.
And...
and this is replaced. So I lived in San Francisco for almost 20 years, and near me was a building that was called California Pacific Medical Center. And I would go, and sometimes I had appointments in there, and I would go past there, and it basically looked like a Czech secret police headquarters. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, people have to die in this fucking building, and people have to die in this building. And I learned later, actually, that the original site of this had been built by what was once a very cohesive community. It was the German community in San Francisco, and they had basically gotten together, and in 100 years ago or so, it was originally German hospital. And if you looked at pictures of German hospital, of course, it's this absolutely beautiful brick, whatever structure that was ripped down to create this like monstrosity which sort of radiates cruelty in every direction. And the thing is, when people look at this brutalist architecture, they have two responses to it. It is essentially an architecture of cruelty. And when they look at this architecture of cruelty, either they identify with the victims or with the torturers. And if they identify with the torturers, they find it beautiful. They find it beautiful because it feels powerful. It feels like defiant almost in a way. It feels like, when you look at the energy of Le Corbusier, or Oscar Niemeyer creating fucking Brasilia. I was in Brazil recently. They have their own vernacular concrete architecture, and it is absolutely an architecture of cruelty. And like the people who are on the side of power look at this architecture of cruelty and they feel warm. I think if you basically put a plethysmograph on their penis, it would expand slightly when they see this architecture because they feel strong.
Absolutely. Like people understand it wrong. Like being conservative also in this matter doesn't mean like I want to restore like historical buildings. I want to restore like aspects.
Just checking my,
Of course.
All right, let me give 15 here. No, let me give 15. Let's go.
How much time do we have?
I'm already late, so I'll tell him. How long does it take to get to the dome, to the cathedral from here?
I don't know.
4 minutes. Okay.
So let's do another 15 minutes. I would say. Okay, is that okay?
Yeah.
And talking about women, I would say.
Yeah, we'll talk about women. One second. Let's talk about women, or as some call them, foids.
Just one point. What people understand wrong in being conservative or in admiring aesthetics is it doesn't mean just restoring old buildings. It doesn't mean like you have this fable.
Restoring the geists behind the old buildings.
Yes. So it can also be futuristic. It can be anything actually, but it needs this what we call geist.
It needs this geist, and to restore an old building. Okay, it's good, but it's just antiquarianism, right? It's just a LARP. Actually, antiquarianism is not at all sufficient. Actually, it reminds me of this line of the president of South Africa, Paul Kruger, 100 years ago, who said. It's a great line. He said, "Let us take what is good about the past and use it to build the future." Because if you're acting with contempt for the past, that immediately disqualifies you.
Absolutely.
But you can't restore it. You can never go back.
Yeah,
you can only go forward.
We were talking about Stefan George, who is actually also he says like it is absolutely necessary to let to not restore old buildings. What I wanted to ask, and coming back from the past to the present to the future, maybe like. We were talking about the crisis of liberal structures or the liberal state, the democratic state. It's one of the main topics, but one have to admit that there are these crises like Brexit and Trump being elected and so on, like pseudo crises actually.
Yeah. That's right.
It's actually more propaganda and useful propaganda.
Because the left is always, we're about to lose, we're the underdog, we're the underdog. Trump is going to crush us, right?
This is the question.
It's crap.
This is the question. Actually, it is still working well, the liberal system. So
it's still quite alive.
Yeah.
It's still quite running. Oh yes, no. We've barely touched.
So what can we do?
We've barely touched it. And the thing is that. There's. Do you know anything about martial arts?
Yeah.
There's a fake martial art. It's completely fake martial art called Aikido. And I think when we mention Aikido, it's important to mention that this is a fake martial art, and you do not want to become an Aikido black belt and try to mix martial arts because you will get your ass kicked. And yet. The idea of Aikido, of essentially you are using your enemy's power against himself and you have no power of your own, is, I think, really essential to opposing this system. It's like actually, when I think about sort of the death of liberalism in a way, and what form it will take is almost impossible to imagine, but it wants to die. It hates itself. It has no conviction. It's lost its own faith. And there's a story by, do you know the American writer Edgar Allan Poe? You've heard of Poe, of course. One of his short stories, very brilliant, idiosyncratic writer, Southerner actually. And the story is The Case of M. Valdemar. And M. Valdemar is some kind of European aristocrat or something, and he's dying. He's got a terminal disease, and he's like, aha, I would like to live forever and not die. And my way of doing that is to be hypnotized. So he's mesmerized, as you would say at the time, and that indeed suspends his life. And so he's just like, he's there in the bed, breathing very shallowly, and his friends are all around him, and like he's not dying, he's living forever. And then he's trying really hard to communicate. He can barely, whatever. Someone listens to him, gets really close up to his ear, and like, what is he trying to say? What is he trying to tell us? And they finally hear what he's saying, and he's like, I want to die. and then they're like, okay, and they get the mesmerist back in, and he releases the spell, and like M. Valdemar doesn't just die, he like liquefies, like instantly. He's like, his body melts into the sheet, and there's just this like blackened skeleton there, and this ichor, this disgusting liquid, right? And I think that, you know, the extent to which liberalism, like the Soviet Union in some ways, hates itself and wants to die is very real. I think that when you look at basically, at least the smart people involved in the system, they feel this terrible pain, which is they're sort of they're just constantly forced to be hypocritical, they're constantly dissimulating, and they know it. They know it, they feel it, but they can't do anything else.
Very, very interesting point. I mean, this idea, or this to say it with Freud, this trieb or this wish of dying, this profound wish,
the death wish,
the death wish, actually brings me to a point. Kind of, this is like, let's say, a private philosophy, a private idea of what is actually what are the main hurdles to surpassing and to go through liberal state, which is actually this death wish, which is profoundly related to, and we were talking about history, but actually our main topic was before starting women, and we were talking like 2 or 3 hours about women, and this would be like the question, is the relation to women actually one of the main hurdles to surpassing, to going through this liberal states, especially as far as the liberal state and the political thinking, or the way of thinking political, is profoundly related to female.
The public is a woman, and I'm not sure who first said the public is a woman. You know, it might have been a painter, it might have been someone else, but the public is certainly a woman. And the thing is, this goes squarely against the sort of kind of John Stuart Mill high idea of democracy that we're all like debating. No. Power is about projecting aesthetics, and also seducing a woman is about projecting aesthetics. No one has ever argued in the history of the world, no one has ever argued a woman into going home with them. And no one has ever reasoned a woman into going home with them. And if they argued the woman into going home with them, what worked was not the reason behind the argument, but the aesthetics behind the argument. But no one has ever reasoned a woman into going home with them.
So actually the main concern has to be like the relation, or the women's question.
The woman question.
The final solution for the woman's question.
The endless song, des Freud's, right? And understanding, like, actually, and this is also the problem of populism in a way, because populism is young and has not yet matured, and populism has this huge problem, which is that in a world of democratic theory, the only way that we can think about populism is to imagine the people leading their leaders. When there is ever anything that a populist party like Trump does wrong, it is because he is following his followers, and because he does not yet have the confidence to lead his followers. And you'll see many people, who, those of us who find women attracted to us can look back at a time when they were not interested in us at all. And the reason they were not interested in us at all is that we were always trying to please them. And actually, the weak populist leader is the leader who is always trying to please his supporters, and that actually generates a much weaker bond between the leader and the follower. And actually, if the situation, is actually just come with me, we're going out.
It's actually the feminization.
The woman should not decide what movie you're going to go see.
Absolutely,
it's like you're just not like, what movie should we go see? It's an instant turnoff. It's like, we're going to see this. We're going to there. We're going to do that.
And actually, it's the feminization of politics, if I understand you right. It's the feminization of politics. And this is, we were talking about this really fantastic word, which I really admire and adore, Freud. Freud is actually the upscaled femina, like the women technologized and with all these supplies, with Instagram, with WhatsApp, with showing herself and etc. And especially linked and especially fitting these technological spheres, especially fitting these liberal technological mass spheres.
Well, because this
created for that,
this sphere asks, feminism asks her to be a man, but she is not actually a man. And, this causes, it's very hard. It's very hard. I don't know if you know any beautiful woman, but it's very hard for beautiful women these days. It's very difficult to be a beautiful woman, because as a beautiful woman, you basically have to be selective. Yeah, if you were like a sexual pervert, you can sleep with whatever, but actually a normal female psychology is not like that at all. And if you're a beautiful woman with a normal sexual psychology, you're going to be very picky, and you find that you deserve to be very picky. And most of the beautiful women that I know basically find themselves very disappointed and are basically settling for men who are inferior to them. And actually, the problem is that the men that they really want don't have to pick. They can go boom, boom, boom.
Because I would say the beautiful woman is kind of the idea of fascism par excellence, and it doesn't fit to our times, because these mass times, this idea of the masses, this idea of value distributed, isn't really linked to the beautiful woman, this makes this break, and this makes the aspect you're talking about. And in the end, also because we were talking about populism, and this really also is linked to that, and this brings us to a very important point, and the separation of two, especially in Germany, very visible, two views on what is right, what is the right, and what is actually the essence of being on the right, the right. And we have with FIUME, with Castrum, this idea of elitism, this idea. Because of that, I was asking about Metternich. Because of that, I was also asking about this skepticism about populism, And I'm very glad you're talking about, and you're saying
to create an elitist right is very hard, and yet the right is essentially elitist and must be elitist. And
you lose that immediately when you start really to being influenced by the masses, because
it's an inversion. It's like, it's a complete inversion. Actually, the followers should follow the leader. The message of the leader to the follower, the fundamental message is like, come with me if you want to live. It's like, we're going to go see this movie, actually follow me. And when you have it's not even like a command of follow me. It's like, we're doing this. All right, this is the restaurant we're going to. We're going to see this movie, right? And, girls would much rather have you say, hey, we're going out and we're going to see this movie, rather than, hey, what movie should we go see, right? Hey, what movie should we go see, right? We've all made that mistake in our dating lives, and it's like, no, actually, that's not what they want, and they don't really know that that's not what they want. Because they're not necessarily they don't have this kind of, I mean, some of them do, of course, some of them are very, very perceptive, but like, you know, feeling their response to like, no, I would much rather be told what movie we're seeing than to be asked what movie we're seeing.
You were asked, like I saw a podcast of yours, an interview asked by, don't know who he was, like a normie, asking you if you're d'accord and right that Trump like kicking out all these persons, and he was like, why is he kicking out all these persons? He said, of course I'm right, like this is kind of essence of leadership, like saying what's the way and saying what movie you're watching. Yeah. Curtis, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. It was amazing.
We will have to do a sequel sometime. You know what would be fun? What would be fun would be if we could do a little podcast, but we speak only about poetry.
It would be great. This would be great.
It's a great pleasure. Curtis. I have to go to my next thing, but amazingly fun. Thank you so much.